What if Naruto traveled to Hunter x Hunter universe? Part 11. That's natural energy, Jing murmured, his eyes wide as he watched Naruto's form. He's not just suppressing his energy anymore. He's actively matching the frequency of the continent. He's becoming a part of the landscape. Up ahead, a massive, vertical curtain of shifting violet energy cascaded down from the clouds, completely blocking the narrow mountain pass. It looked like an invisible, roaring waterfall of raw force, threatening to sweep anyone who touched it straight into the bottomless abyss below. The first gap is 5 feet to the left of the main route, Sasuke said, his Rinnegan spinning in perfect focus. He pointed his Kusanagi blade toward a tiny, flickering pocket of stable space within the roaring violet curtain. Naruto, ground the outer edge. The rest of you, follow immediately behind him. On it, Naruto stepped forward. The moment his golden aura made contact with the violent, cascading river of energy, the mountain shrieked. But instead of being blown back, Naruto planted his boots firmly into the stone. He extended his hands, his fingers splaying wide as he literally caught the edge of the flowing energy. Shish! The violent violet current slammed into Naruto's palms, but his six-path sage mode acted as a perfect, infinite sink. He absorbed the raw, wild natural energy, neutralizing its chaotic spin and safely grounding it through his legs and into the mountain rock beneath him. The ground around his boots cracked, glowing with a soft, warm golden light as the neutralized energy dispersed harmlessly into the stone. Now, go! Naruto gritted out, his teeth clenched as he held open a stable, circular archway in the energy curtain. Move! Sasuke commanded. With absolute precision, Sasuke led the group. He stepped through the gap Naruto had stabilized, his Rinnegan tracking the micro-movements of the surrounding currents. Jing, Gon, and Killua moved in perfect sync, slipping through the golden-rimmed archway right behind the Uchiha. The moment they cleared the barrier, Naruto let go of the current. He leapt forward, landing smoothly beside Sasuke as the violent violet waterfall snapped back into place behind them with a deafening crack. Nice job, Dobi, Sasuke murmured, his eye already scanning the next stretch of the trail. The next barrier is a triple-layered current. It's moving faster. Hey, keep 'em coming. Naruto grinned, his golden eyes flashing with competitive fire. We're just getting warmed up. For the next hour, they climbed the sheer, glistening peaks of the Prism Ridge in a flawless, rhythmic dance of spatial navigation and energy grounding. Sasuke mapped the invisible, deadly geometry of the mountain, guiding them through the safest vectors, while Naruto acted as the ultimate lightning rod, absorbing and dispersing the terrifying, mountain-shredding currents before they could touch the group. Gon and Killua watched in absolute awe. The sheer scale of power, paired with such microscopic, flawless coordination, was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. They don't even have to look at each other, Killua whispered to Jing as they stepped over a newly grounded rift. They just know exactly what the other is going to do. That's not just training, Killua, Jing said, a deep grin spreading across his face as the summit of the ridge finally came into view. That's a lifetime of fighting side by side. That's trust. With one final, coordinated push, Naruto grounded the massive, swirling vortex of the summit's auroral halo, holding it open like a magnificent, shimmering gateway of gold and violet light. All right, guys, through the portal, Naruto yelled over the roaring energy. One by one, they leapt through the stabilized gap, stepping over the absolute crest of the Prism Ridge. The moment they crossed, the roaring wind and violent energy vanished. They stood on a high, silent plateau, looking down at a brand new, completely uncharted horizon stretching out beneath a sky filled with 3 giant, slow-orbiting moons. The next sector of the Dark Continent lay wide open before them. The air on the high plateau was stark, silent, and incredibly clear. Standing at the absolute edge of the Prism Ridge, the team stared out at a sight that defied all known geographical laws. The sky above them wasn't dark, but a deep, velvet indigo, illuminated by 3 massive, glowing moons that hung in a perfect, slow-orbiting diagonal line. The lunar light caught the vast landscape below, painting the entire region in shades of brilliant silver, neon blue, and soft violet. Unbelievable, Jing whispered, his voice hushed in genuine reverence. He pulled out his leather-bound journal, but his pencil hovered over the page as he tried to take in the sheer, impossible scale of the vista. My old maps of the outer boundaries didn't even mention this. We've officially entered the cradle of the gods. Directly below the plateau, the land rolled out into massive, terraced valleys of glowing, crystal-like vegetation. Glowing wheat-like stalks, several stories high and sparkling with natural energy, curled and swayed in spiral patterns across the terrain. Floating islands of fertile earth drifted silently above the fields, their long roots hanging down like glowing blue threads to drink from the rich, energetic soil below. It's so quiet, Gon said, his voice barely a whisper as he stepped up to the very edge of the stone cliff. The constant, background hum of localized nen and chaotic gravity that had plagued them since the mirror vault was entirely gone. Here, the energy was vast, dense, but completely at peace. It's because the natural energy here is perfectly balanced, Sasuke said, his Rinnegan quietly analyzing the glowing fields below. The complex, chaotic vectors he had been tracking on the climb had smoothed out into long, sweeping highways of pure, uncorrupted chakra. There are no blockages, no parasites. This is what a world looks like when its life force is allowed to flow without interference. Man, Naruto let out a long breath, his glowing sage mode aura slowly receding as he deactivated the golden form. His eyes returned to their normal, cheerful blue, but he kept his hands resting on his hips as he looked down at the glowing valley. It feels so warm, like being wrapped in one of Hinata's blankets. My chakra is recovering just by standing here. Don't get too comfortable, Dobi, Sasuke warned, though his own posture had finally relaxed. He sheathed his sword with a clean, quiet click. A place with this much concentrated natural energy is bound to attract things that are equally massive. We aren't the only ones who use this flow to power ourselves. He's right, Killua said, his eyes scanning the shadow lines of the floating islands. My electricity is fully charged, but my instinct is telling me that the things sleeping in those fields are on a completely different level than the S-class spiders we fought earlier. If we wake them up, we won't just be fighting a swarm, we'll be fighting the valley itself. Jing closed his journal with a sharp, satisfying snap and slid it into his pack. He looked at the four young powerhouses standing beside him, a brilliant, wild grin spreading across his face under the light of the three moons. Then we'll just have to tread lightly, Jing said, adjusting his collar as he stepped toward the winding stone path leading down into the glowing terraces. Come on, boys. The night is young, the air is clean, and we've got a whole new world to map. Let's find a spot to make camp and see if those glowing bubble plants Naruto wanted to eat are actually poisonous. I told you, they're delicious. Naruto yelled, instantly breaking into a jog down the path. First one to the floating island gets the biggest sleeping spot. No way, Naruto. I'm taking the top spot. Gon laughed, sprinting right beside him. You two are going to get us killed before we even pitch a tent. Killua groaned, though he was already running to catch up. Sasuke watched them go, a small, genuine smile finally showing on his face as the gentle, silver light of the three moons guided their path into the glowing valley. They never change, Sasuke murmured. And you wouldn't have it any other way, Jing chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder as they followed them down into the unknown. The descent from the high plateau was surprisingly effortless. With the chaotic gravity of the ravines fully resolved and the oppressive atmospheric pressure of the Prism Ridge neutralized, the team practically glided down the ancient stone path. The towering, crystalline wheat-like stalks grew denser as they reached the valley floor. Up close, the plants weren't made of stone or standard cellulose. They were composed of a dense, semi-translucent fiber that pulsed with a soft, steady rhythm. Faint, blue-gold pollen drifted lazily through the air, carrying a clean scent that smelled of ozone, fresh pine, and sweet rain. Watch where you step, Killua murmured, holding a hand out to stop Gon. Just ahead of them on the path, a small, rabbit-sized creature made entirely of a glassy, sapphire-like material was nibbling on a fallen seed. When it noticed the group, its ears, shaped like delicate glass leaves, flared gently. Instead of running, it let out a tiny, melodic chime, its body glowing a slightly brighter shade of blue, before it hopped casually into the crystalline undergrowth. Everything here seems to be made of light and glass, Gon said, crouching down to look at the glowing trail the creature had left behind. It's like the physical world and the aura world are the same thing here. That's exactly what it is, Jing explained, walking up beside them. In the human world, aura is something living things have to squeeze out of themselves. But here, in the cradle, the environment is the aura. Physical matter is just highly compressed energy. It's why you feel so light. It's like Mount Myoboku, Naruto agreed, his hands resting behind his head as he strolled. When I was training to be a sage, the old toad told me that natural energy is all around us, but you have to become perfectly still to feel it. Here, you don't even have to try. It just flows right into you. Which means your sensory perception should be sharper than ever, Sasuke noted, keeping his pace steady. Do not let the peaceful atmosphere dull your reflexes, Dobi. The larger currents are shifting ahead. They reached a wide, flat clearing situated directly beneath one of the low-hanging floating islands. The island hovered about 40 feet above the ground, its thick, glowing blue roots draping downward like a curtain of living willow branches. A small, crystal-clear spring bubbled up from the center of the clearing, pooling into a basin of smooth, white stones that reflected the light of the three moons above. Perfect, Jing said, dropping his heavy pack onto a flat, mossy boulder. We camp here tonight. The water in this valley is purified by the roots of the floating islands. It's completely safe to drink. Yes. Food time, Naruto cheered, immediately sitting cross-legged on the soft, glowing grass. He looked up at Sasuke with wide, pleading eyes. All right, Sasuke, you promised. Fire. Real fire. Sasuke closed his eyes, letting out a quiet, resigned sigh. He walked to the center of the clearing, where a few dried, petrified branches of the crystalline wood lay scattered. He didn't use his Mangekyo. That would have incinerated the wood in an instant. Instead, he raised 2 fingers to his mouth, taking a slow breath. Fire style. Fireball jutsu. He released a tiny, incredibly controlled stream of warm, orange embers from his lips, gently igniting the dry wood. The fire caught instantly, its orange flames dancing in beautiful contrast to the cool, blue-violet glow of the valley. Whoa, neat trick, Gon said, sitting down next to Naruto. Can you teach me how to breathe fire? It requires chakra paper, years of nature transformation training, and a lot of burnt tongues, Naruto grinned, already pulling out several packs of instant noodles and a small cooking pot from his own scroll. But don't worry, Gon. I can teach you the basics of molding energy once we're done eating. I'm holding you to that, Gon beamed. As Naruto set the pot over the fire, Killua sat down on a nearby root, his eyes drifting up to the floating island above them. His En was completely relaxed now, no longer fighting the environment. For the first time since they had crossed the boundary into the Dark Continent, the tight, defensive coil in his chest had fully unwound. Hey, Jing, Killua asked quietly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. How much further does this valley go? Jing leaned back against his pack, looking up at the 3 moons tracking slowly across the indigo sky. The cradle of the gods is vast, Killua. It stretches for hundreds of miles before it hits the Dead Sea of Ruin. But we don't need to rush. The map we're making isn't just about finding the end. It's about understanding how it all fits together. Jing looked over at Naruto, who was currently arguing with Sasuke about the correct cooking time for dried noodles, while Gon watched them with pure, unbridled amusement. We've got the best company in the world, Jing smiled, closing his eyes. And all the time we need. Under the gentle, silver light of the 3 moons, the 5 travelers settled into the warm, quiet rhythm of the valley, their laughter and quiet conversations drifting up into the glowing branches of the giant trees as they prepared for whatever the next horizon would bring. The smell of instant ramen steam mixed with the clean, ozone scent of the crystalline valley. Naruto was practically inhaling his noodles, while Gon sat cross-legged, staring at Sasuke's sheathed sword with absolute curiosity. Hey, Sasuke, Naruto, Gon said, leaning forward. How does your energy actually work? Jing says it's called chakra, but when I watch you guys, It feels a lot like Nen, just different. Like it's built out of different blocks. Naruto swallowed a massive mouthful of noodles, wiping his chin. Oh, chakra is totally simple. It's basically mixing your physical energy, like how much you train your body, and your spiritual energy, which is like your mind and focus. You squeeze them together inside your body, mold it with hand signs, and boom. You get jutsu. Actually, it's a bit more precise than that, Sasuke interrupted, his voice calm as he poured a small cup of hot water. He looked at Gon and Killua. Chakra is an active creation. We are not born with flowing chakra, we produce it by blending those two forces dynamically. Nen, from what Jing explained to us, is your life energy itself, constantly leaking from your aura nodes. Right, Killua said, leaning his chin on his hand. Everyone has life energy, but unless you open your nodes, it just spills out and goes to waste. Once they're open, we use Ten to keep it wrapped around us like a shroud. That's the main difference, Sasuke explained. He held up his left hand. Without a single sound, a tiny, perfectly stable sphere of blue chakra materialized, hovering just above his palm. It didn't crackle or spark, it was under absolute, microscopic control. We don't keep our chakra flowing constantly. Doing so would exhaust our physical and mental reserves. We mold it when we need it, use it, and then let it disperse. Your Nen is a constant stream. Huh. Gon blinked, his eyes fixed on the spinning sphere. He held up his own hand, flaring his Nen. A bright, flickering shroud of golden aura enveloped his fist, raw, warm, and highly concentrated. So when I do this, I'm just letting my natural life force leak out in a big clump. Exactly, Naruto grinned, pointing his chopsticks at Gon's fist. Your aura is super strong, Gon. But it's like a big campfire, it's hot and bright, but a lot of the heat escapes into the air. With chakra, we try to turn that campfire into a tiny, super hot laser beam. A laser beam, Killua muttered. He closed his eyes, and a sudden, high-frequency hum filled the clearing. Blue sparks of electricity began to dance across his shoulders and down his arms. My Kanmuru, my lightning, is something I programmed my aura to do because of my childhood training with electricity. How do you guys change your energy's properties? Sasuke looked at Killua's lightning, his Rinnegan spinning slightly as he analyzed the electrical current. We call it nature transformation. Everyone is born with an affinity for one of 5 basic elements: fire, wind, lightning, earth, or water. You have to train your mind and body to physically convert the raw chakra into that element. To demonstrate, Sasuke slowly closed his hand over the blue sphere. When he opened it, the chakra had turned into tiny, perfectly formed crystalline leaves that slowly dissolved into the air. I have a lightning affinity, just like you, Sasuke said. But instead of using my body as a generator, I mold my chakra to mimic the exact vibration and frequency of natural lightning. Naruto's primary affinity is wind. Yeah, watch this. Naruto set his ramen bowl down. He reached out and picked up a dry leaf from a nearby bush. He held it between his 2 index fingers. To learn wind chakra, I had to practice cutting a leaf in half using nothing but my energy. You have to make your chakra super thin and incredibly sharp. He focused for a split second. A tiny, imperceptible ripple of air passed over the leaf. With a soft snip, the leaf split perfectly down the middle, falling into 2 pieces in his hands. Whoa, Gon's eyes practically turned into stars. That is so cool. It's like Shinya, emission, and transmutation combined. It's about efficiency, Jing chimed in from his spot by the tree, a faint, proud smile on his face as he watched the exchange. Nen is incredibly versatile because our minds can shape it into almost anything through vows and limitations. But chakra is structured. It's like a highly refined science developed over thousands of years of warfare. Can we try? Gon asked, looking at Naruto with pure excitement. Can you teach me how to sharpen my energy like that? Hey, you bet. Naruto laughed, leaping to his feet and tossing Gon a handful of dry leaves. All right, first step is to hold the leaf between your fingers, and instead of just pushing your aura outward, try to make it slide across the surface like a tiny razor blade. Go. Killua watched Gon instantly go to work, his face scrunched up in intense concentration as he tried to manipulate his nen into a cutting edge. Kahlua looked over at Sasuke, who was quietly sipping his tea. "Your lightning," Kahlua said softly, his voice dropping. "Can you show me how you make it move without a path?" Sasuke met the young assassin's gaze. The corners of his mouth twitched into a very faint, almost imperceptible smile. He stood up, stepping away from the fire. "Watch my fingers," Sasuke said. Under the peaceful, silver light of the three moons, the quiet valley became a classroom. The soft crackle of Sasuke's Chidori and the eager shouts of Naruto and Gon echoed gently into the night, blending perfectly with the ancient, harmonious hum of the cradle of the gods. The silver light of the three moons slowly paled, sinking below the western edge of the high plateau as a soft, amber dawn began to bleed across the sky of the cradle. The transition to morning in this sector was incredibly subtle. There was no sudden blast of heat or harsh sunlight. Instead, the deep indigo sky softened into a warm, lavender rose hue, and the crystalline pampas grass shifted its glow from a cool electric blue to a gentle, pearlescent gold. By the time the first rays of the morning sun touched the peaks of the Prism Ridge, Sasuke was already standing by the edge of the campsite, his pack strapped tight, watching the mist rise from the white stone basin. "All right, rise and shine, sleepyheads." Naruto's voice shattered the morning peace as he stretched his arms toward the sky, his joints popping loudly. "Man, that was the best sleep I've had in weeks. The ground here is basically a giant mattress. That's because the natural energy in the soil was actively repairing your muscle tissue while you slept, idiot," Kahlua muttered, sitting up from his sleeping bag and immediately rubbing his messy silver hair. He looked over at Gon, who was already fully awake, holding a dry leaf between his fingers and squinting at it. "I almost had it," Gon murmured, his brow furrowed as he tried to channel his aura to slice the edge. "Just a little bit more. Save it for the trail, Gon," Jing laughed, tossing a light bedroll directly onto his son's head. "We've got a long march ahead of us today. Once we leave the cradle, the luxury treatment is over." As they packed up their gear, dousing the remains of Sasuke's fire with water from the crystal-clear spring, Jing pulled out his leather journal. He drew a bold, clean path leading away from their campsite, pointing toward the north where the vibrant, glowing vegetation of the valley abruptly gave way to a stark, gray horizon. "Beyond these terraces lies the boundary of the next sector," Jing said, his voice dropping into a focused, analytical register. "The Dead Sea of Ruin. It's a massive, dried-out basin filled with the fossilized remains of an ancient, prehistoric ocean. The natural energy there is different, it's stagnant, heavy, and completely dry. It's a dead zone." "A dead zone?" Naruto tilted his head, adjusting the forehead protector around his neck. "Like, no plants or animals?" "Worse," Sasuke said, stepping up next to Jing. He had already spent the last few minutes scanning the distant gray horizon with his Rinnegan. "The energy there isn't just absent, it's being actively drained. I can feel a massive, low-frequency pull from here. Whatever is at the center of that basin is hungry." "Perfect," Kahlua smirked, tossing a small pebble into the air and catching it. "A giant, empty desert with a massive energy-sucking drain at the center. Sounds like a great place for a walk." "That's the spirit." Gon grinned, hoisting his backpack onto his shoulders. "Let's go see what's draining it." With Jing leading the vanguard and Sasuke keeping a watchful eye on the rear, the five travelers stepped out of the warm, glowing terraces of the Cradle of the Gods. As they marched toward the transition line, the vibrant gold of the grass slowly faded into a dull, petrified ash, and the clean, sweet scent of ozone was replaced by the dry, metallic tang of ancient dust. The Dead Sea of Ruin lay ahead, silent, vast, and waiting. The transition was like stepping across a line drawn in ash. Behind them, the golden terraces of the Cradle of the Gods still shimmered with soft, pearlescent life. Ahead, the ground plummeted into a colossal, sunken basin that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a landscape of absolute desolation. The sea was a vast desert of fine, bone-white salt and gray dust, broken only by the towering, fossilized rib cages of leviathans so massive their remains looked like mountain ranges. The air here was bone dry, instantly sucking the moisture from their lips. But more than the physical dryness, there was a profound, heavy silence. Kahlua whispered, stopping right at the border. He extended his hand, trying to flare a tiny spark of electricity. The blue spark sputtered and vanished almost instantly, dissolving into the gray air. It's like trying to light a match underwater. The moment my aura leaves my skin, it just evaporates. It's not evaporating, Kahlua, Jing said, his voice grim as he looked down into the white expanse. It's being pulled. Keep your ten as tight and dense as possible. If you let your guard down, this basin will draft your life force like a sponge. I see it, Sasuke said. His Rinnegan was focused on the center of the vast, white sea. In his vision, the beautiful, flowing highways of natural energy they had enjoyed in the cradle were being violently stretched. They were all warping toward a single, massive point of origin in the far distance, a swirling, silent vortex of dark, negative space that sat in the deepest trench of the dry sea. There is a massive spatial distortion at the center, Sasuke reported, his hand resting on his sword hilt. A localized singularity. It isn't just pulling energy, it is folding the space around it to draw everything in. It's an active drain. That's the void well, Jing said, referencing his notes. It's what keeps this entire sector dead. Anything that dies in this basin has its soul and energy pulled straight to the center. It's a closed loop of decay. Naruto took a step forward, his golden sage eyes narrowing. Even without flaring his chakra, his connection to nature allowed him to feel the sheer, tragic emptiness of the land. It felt like a wound on the world. We can't just climb down there normally, Naruto said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. If we walk into that, we'll be running on empty before we even make it halfway. Then we don't walk, Sasuke said. He stepped to the very edge of the salt cliff. His left eye spun, the crimson patterns of his Rinnegan aligning. He reached out with his hand, his sensory range locking onto a massive, fossilized spine of an ancient sea creature that lay about a mile deep into the white desert. Naruto, brace yourself. Got it. Naruto grinned, instantly knowing the plan. Walking is the only way we learn the true layout of this place, Jing said, stepping past Sasuke and looking out over the blinding white salt flats. If we jump over it, we miss the structural shifts in the ground. Besides, it's about time these two learned how to survive a dead zone. He turned back to Gon and Kahlua, his expression unusually serious. Gon, Kahlua, standard Zetsu stops your aura from leaking out. It closes your nodes. But in a place like the Dead Sea of Ruin, the external suction is so strong it will literally pry your nodes open from the outside. It's like a vacuum trying to suck the air out of a sealed jar. Kahlua frowned, looking down at his hands. So how do we stop it? You don't just close the doors, Jing said. He held up his hand. Slowly, a tiny, incredibly dense bead of crimson aura formed on his index finger. It didn't flicker. It didn't glow. In fact, to anyone without sensory training, it would have been completely invisible and undetectable. You have to pull your energy so deep into your physical core that it registers as non-existent to the world around you. We call it Shin Zetsu, Deep Thread Zetsu. You fold your aura inward, layer upon layer, until it mimics the density of a solid stone. Folding it, Gon murmured. He closed his eyes and immediately attempted the technique, trying to compress his golden nen. But the moment he concentrated, the external pull of the void well yanked at his aura, causing a bright, erratic flare that was instantly sucked toward the horizon. Gon gasped, feeling a sudden, sharp exhaustion hit his chest. Whoa, easy, Naruto said, placing a warm, steady hand on Gon's shoulder. He channeled a tiny, gentle pulse of sage chakra into Gon's system to stabilize his breathing. Don't fight the vacuum, Gon. When I use sage mode, I have to let the energy flow through me without letting it take anything. Think of your body like a sieve, not a wall. Naruto's right, Sasuke added, his Rinnegan tracking the microcurrents of the drain. If you try to build a hard shell, the pressure will only crack it. You must compress your energy into a single, infinitesimal point at your center of gravity, and let the external vacuum slide over your skin like water over oil. Kahlua took a deep breath. His training as an assassin had already taught him how to erase his presence to a terrifying degree. He closed his eyes, visualizing his bioelectricity and his life force not as a shroud, but as a tiny, dense needle of blue light tucked safely beneath his breastbone. He withdrew his consciousness from his limbs, pulling every scrap of energy into that single, microscopic point. The invisible, pulling tension on his skin suddenly slipped away. Whoa, Kahlua gasped softly, opening his eyes. His body felt incredibly light, almost weightless. It worked. It feels like I don't even have a body for the storm to pull on. Perfect, Kahlua, Jing grinned, visibly impressed by how quickly the Zoldyck prodigy caught on. That's exactly it. Gon watched Kahlua, a spark of competitive determination igniting in his eyes. He took a deep, grounding breath. He didn't try to force his aura down. Instead, he visualized his father's advice and Naruto's words. He let his outer nodes relax, but inside, at his center, he began to wrap his aura tightly around his physical core, weaving it like a dense ball of yarn. Slowly, the golden aura around Gon completely vanished. To Sasuke's Rinnegan, Gon's spiritual signature shrank until he appeared as nothing more than a quiet, inert pebble on the mountain path. I think I got it, Gon whispered, a bright, silent smile breaking across his face. Excellent, Sasuke said, stepping forward onto the salt flats. Let's move before the wind shifts. The drain at the center is beginning to pulse. With their energies perfectly tucked away, the five of us stepped onto the bone-white salt of the Dead Sea of Ruin. Walking in a tight, silent line, they slipped into the gray, ancient basin like a crew of ghosts, completely invisible to the hungry, waiting eye of the void well. The white salt flats crunched softly under their boots, the only sound in a world that felt entirely abandoned by time. As they walked deeper into the basin, the scale of the ancient ruins became staggeringly clear. What they had thought were simple fossilized ribs from the cliffside were actually the titanic, calcified remains of prehistoric deep-sea leviathans. One particular skeletal archway stretched hundreds of feet into the air, its ribbed arches forming a natural, bone-white cathedral over the gray desert. This must have been an incredibly deep ocean trench once, Gon whispered, keeping his Shin-Zetsu locked down. To have things this big swimming around. The Dark Continent has always been a place of extremes, Jing murmured back, his eyes darting toward the towering structures of salt-encrusted stone nearby. Before the water dried up, this place was likely teeming with massive, deep-sea magical beasts. When the void well opened, it drained the life right out of the water. What we're walking on is the dust of an entire ecosystem. Hey, look at that, Kahlua said, pointing toward a strange formation at the base of a massive, petrified skull. Crystallized structures, sharp and dark as obsidian, grew like weeds out of the salt flats. Unlike the warm, vibrant crystals of the cradle, these structures were a dull, light-absorbing black. They didn't reflect the pale morning sun, instead, they seemed to warp the light around them, creating a faint, hazy shimmer in the air. Those are void shards, Jing warned, guiding the group slightly to the left to avoid them. They're highly concentrated deposits of the stagnant energy being drawn toward the center. If you touch one, it'll instantly siphon a massive chunk of your physical stamina. Don't even brush against them. Got it, Naruto nodded, walking with a stiff, careful gait. No touching the creepy black glass. Sasuke, walking a few paces behind, suddenly stopped. His left eye spun, the patterns of his Rinnegan locking onto a high ridge of petrified coral to their right. We aren't alone, Sasuke said, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. The group instantly halted, freezing in place. Thanks to the rigorous Shin-Zetsu training Gon and Kahlua had just practiced, their presence was entirely erased. They looked like nothing more than inert statues against the white salt. From behind the petrified coral, a pack of bizarre, gaunt creatures began to crawl. They had the elongated bodies of blind deep-sea eels, but they walked on multiple, spindly legs made of segmented, black stone. Their heads were smooth, eyeless domes, but where a mouth should have been, a swirling, miniature vortex of dark energy pulsed slowly, mimicking the pulling force of the void well at the center of the basin. Void scavengers. They're blind, Jing whispered, his lips barely moving. They hunt by tracking energy signatures. If we flare our aura or chakra even a fraction, they'll swarm us in seconds. The pack of scavengers slithered down the salt dune, their segmented stone legs clicking softly against the mineral crust. Two of them stopped just 10 feet away from Naruto, their eyeless heads slowly swaying back and forth as they sensed the air. One creature extended its neck, its dark vortex mouth spinning faster as it tried to detect any trace of warmth or spirit in the immediate vicinity. It was so close Naruto could feel the faint, cold pull of its vacuum breath against his cheek. Naruto didn't blink. He kept his breathing incredibly shallow, his golden sage eyes fixed straight ahead as he let the cold, empty draft of the basin pass completely through his perception. He didn't resist the pull, he simply existed as a hollow vessel, letting his energy remain compressed into a microscopic, undetectable point deep within his chest. After a few tense, breathless seconds, the creature let out a low, clicking sound and turned away, satisfied that nothing but dead salt lay in front of it. The pack slowly shuffled past, their long bodies disappearing into the dark obsidian shards further down the path. Killua let out a long, silent breath he had been holding, casting a glance at Naruto. Not bad for a loud guy, his look seemed to say. Naruto offered a quiet, cocky grin in return, wiping a single bead of sweat from his forehead. The center of the basin is just beyond the next ridge, Sasuke whispered, gesturing toward a massive, sweeping slope of white salt ahead. We're almost at the source of the drain. They climbed the final slope of white salt, their boots sinking into the dry, powdery dust. As they crested the ridge, the sheer scale of the void well came into view, and even Sasuke's stoic expression fractured into a look of sharp, sudden recognition. The center of the basin was a colossal, perfectly circular sinkhole spanning nearly a mile across. Instead of a natural cavern, the walls of the sinkhole were lined with massive, interlocking rings of a familiar, stark white stone, the exact material used in the monuments of the Otsutsuki clan. Floating silently in the center of this massive abyss was a towering, three-sided obelisk made of dark, light-absorbing obsidian. Massive, glowing red runes were etched deep into its surface, but they were flickering violently, pulsing with an unstable, erratic rhythm. The air around the obelisk was actively warping, bending the pale morning light into a swirling, gravitational lens that dragged the surrounding atmosphere down into the dark void beneath it. This is, Naruto muttered, his golden sage eyes wide as he stared at the floating structure. Sasuke, those markings, they look like the seals we saw in the dimensional ruins. They are, Sasuke said, his Rinnegan spinning with intense, crimson focus as he analyzed the interlocking lines of energy. It's an ancient Otsutsuki sealing matrix. But it isn't meant to drain this continent. It was designed as a containment lock to seal away a massive reserve of raw, natural energy deep within the planet's mantle. A containment lock? Gon asked, looking down into the swirling black void beneath the obelisk. Then why is it sucking everything in? Because it's broken, Jing said, stepping up to the edge of the precipice, his eyes mapping the fractured stone rings. He pointed to a massive fissure running down the side of the floating obelisk. Look at the primary conduit. The seal's feedback loop has cracked. Instead of locking the energy in, the seal has inverted. It's acting like a massive, runaway siphon, dragging the surrounding life force into a closed, decaying loop because it has nowhere to vent. Can we fix it? Killua asked, his hands tense in his pockets as he felt the cold, magnetic pull of the malfunctioning seal tugging at his tightly bound shinzetsu. Or do we have to blow it up? If you blow it up, the compressed energy stored inside the mantle will erupt all at once, Sasuke warned. An explosion of that scale would vaporize this entire sector of the continent and shred the atmosphere of the Cradle of the Gods. We have to stabilize the matrix and close the leak. To do that, we need to balance the flow, Jing explained, looking at Sasuke and Naruto. The Otsutsuki seal is built on high-density spiritual and physical energy. Sasuke, your Rinnegan can rewrite the spatial coordinates of the rift. Naruto, you'll need to use your Sage Chakra to act as a bridge, feeding stable natural energy back into the cracked conduit to equalize the pressure while Sasuke seals it. Sounds like a plan. Naruto grinned, stepping to the very edge of the cliff and rolling up his sleeves. Just tell me where to plug in, Sasuke. Wait, Killua said, his eyes darting to the shifting shadows within the deep crevices of the sinkhole. We've got company. The fluctuating energy is drawing the scavengers. Millions of them. From the dark, fossilized ribs lining the sinkhole's walls, thousands of the eyeless, segmented void scavengers began to slither out, their dark vortex mouths clicking and spinning in a deafening, metallic chorus. Drawn by the unstable flare of the cracked seal, they were beginning to swarm toward the floating obelisk like a sea of black oil. Gon, Killua, protect the perimeter, Jing said, a wild, thrilled grin breaking across his scruffy face as he flared his own crimson nen into a tight, defensive barrier. Don't let a single one of those things touch Naruto or Sasuke while they're working. Let's show these ancient pests how we handle a crowd. You got it, Gon shouted, his golden nen erupting into a brilliant, warm flare as he dropped into his signature stance. First comes Rock. Right behind you, Gon. Killua shouted. The air around Killua split with a deafening, high-frequency scream as he activated Kanmuru, Godspeed. His hair flared into jagged spikes of blinding, white-blue electricity. In a fraction of a millisecond, his nervous system was completely overridden by electrical currents, granting him near instantaneous reaction speeds. With a loud boom, Killua broke the sound barrier. He materialized directly in front of the leading wave of void scavengers, moving so fast the eye could only track a zigzagging trail of blue lightning. Using his sharp, transmutated claws, he shredded through the first dozen creatures in a blur of silent, devastating strikes. They're too soft, Killua called out, his voice echoing from 3 different places at once as he darted between the petrified stone rings of the sinkhole. But don't let them wrap around you. If that vortex mouth touches your skin, it feels like it's dragging your soul out. Understood, Gon yelled. He stood at the edge of the slope, his legs planted firmly in the shifting white salt. His aura was boiling now, no longer suppressed. He concentrated every ounce of his nen into his right fist, the sheer density of his aura creating a glowing, golden sun that illuminated the dark, skeletal depths of the sinkhole. First comes Rock. Gon chanted, his voice deep, resonant, and completely focused. Jing stood just behind him, acting as the tactical anchor. His eyes scanned the swarming horde, calculating their vectors with terrifying precision. Gon. 300 yards out, 12 o'clock. They're clustering in the hollow rib cage to form a larger mass. Blow the foundation, Jing commanded, his voice cutting through the chaotic din. Got it, Gon roared. Yah, yah, naked. He lunged forward, throwing his fist into the salt crust at his feet rather than directly at the beasts. Rock. The impact was cataclysmic. A massive wave of pure, concentrated kinetic force rippled through the earth, shattering the calcified, ancient seabed. The shockwave tore through the salt flats, causing the colossal, towering fossilized rib cage ahead to fracture and collapse in a thunderous roar. Thousands of tons of ancient, heavy bone and white salt crashed downward, burying hundreds of the slithering scavengers in an instant. Nice shot, but we've got flyers. Killua's voice cut through the dust. Several dozen of the larger scavengers had detached from the walls, using their elongated, segmented bodies to glide through the heavy, stagnant air of the abyss, their vortex mouths spinning like dark, miniature tornadoes as they plunged toward Naruto and Sasuke. I've got the skies, Killua static screamed. He leapt from a crumbling stone arch, his body enveloped in a spherical web of lightning, Narukami, lightning bolt. He fired high-voltage arcs of electricity upward, the blinding blue bolts piercing straight through the eyeless domes of the flying beasts. The sheer voltage vaporized their damp, stone-like bodies, sending a rain of harmless gray ash down into the dark abyss. Behind them, Naruto and Sasuke were already deep in the ritual. Naruto's back was to the chaos, his hands pressed flat against the outer ring of the Otsutsuki monument as a thick stream of warm, golden six paths chakra flowed from his palms into the cold, dead stone. Beside him, Sasuke's left eye was spinning violently, his Rinnegan mapping the fractured red runes of the obelisk, preparing to rewrite the ancient seal the moment Naruto equalized the pressure. "They're focusing on the heat of your chakra, Naruto," Jing warned, his own crimson aura flaring as he intercepted a stray scavenger that had managed to slip past the boys. With a casual, open-handed strike, Jing shattered the beast's skull, sending it dissolving into black oil. "Gon, Killua, form a tight defensive ring around the ceiling platform. We have to hold this line for exactly 3 more minutes. We won't let a single one through," Gon shouted, his golden aura flaring anew as he ran to stand side by side with Killua, their backs to the glowing Otsutsuki ruins. Killua's lightning crackled, his eyes gleaming with deadly focus, while Gon raised his glowing fist, ready to unleash another devastating blow. Together, the two young hunters stood as an unbreakable wall of light against the encroaching tide of darkness. 2 minutes, Jing shouted, his voice cutting through the rising screech of the wind. The void well was reacting to the stabilizing chakra. As Naruto fed his warm, life-dense 6 paths energy into the cracked Otsutsuki monument, the surrounding gravity began to warp erratically. Heavy, petrified stones and white salt crystals began to lift off the ground, floating upward in a slow-motion dance around the ceiling platform. "Killua, above," Gon called out, his knees bent as he braced against the fluctuating gravity. A massive, mutated void scavenger, easily the size of a train car, had detached from the deep trench of the sinkhole. Its body was a grotesque fusion of fossilized leviathan bone and jagged black obsidian shards. A colossal vortex, nearly 20 feet wide, spun violently at its center, howling like a miniature hurricane as it plunged directly toward Naruto's exposed back. "I see it." Killua's voice was a flat, electric vibration. He didn't just run, he teleported through the floating debris. Using Kanmuru, his body became a streak of pure, high-voltage lightning. He bypassed the creature's armored head and materialized directly beneath its soft, pulsating underbelly. Discharge. Killua unleashed a massive, localized electrical storm, Ryusaigun, bolt of lightning, directly into the beast's core. The concentrated voltage didn't just shock the monster, it superheated the moisture trapped inside its calcified stone armor. With a series of sharp, deafening cracks, the giant scavenger's outer shell began to rupture. "Gone! It's open!" Killua yelled, instantly leaping away as the creature thrashed in agony. Right. Gon was already midair, using a floating chunk of saltstone as a springboard. He had channeled every remaining ounce of his nen into his fist, but this time, he didn't use rock. He spread his fingers wide, his golden aura reshaping itself into a brilliant, razor-sharp blade of pure, concentrated energy. "Ya, ya, Naked." He brought his hand down in a massive, sweeping arc. Scissors. A colossal beam of golden, transmutated nen sliced through the air, cutting the giant, thrashing scavenger perfectly in half. The two halves of the beast dissolved into gray ash before they could even hit the ground, their stagnant energy dispersing harmlessly into the vacuum. "Now, Sasuke," Naruto roared, his teeth gritted as the golden chakra flowing from his hands reached a brilliant, blinding crescendo. The cracked Otsutsuki runes on the obelisk finally stabilized, turning from an angry, pulsing red to a calm, deep gold. HMPH. Sasuke's Rinnegan spun. He extended his left hand toward the floating obelisk, his fingers curling as he locked onto the spatial coordinates of the primary rift. Aminate Hikara, Chibaku Tensai. Using a highly localized application of his gravity path, Sasuke didn't pull external stones, instead, he collapsed the cracked space inside the obelisk's fissure. The shattered stone edges of the monument slid back together with a resounding, metallic clang. The glowing gold runes locked into place. The violent, howling vacuum of the void well instantly died. The heavy, suffocating pull of the drain vanished, replaced by a sudden, profound calm that washed over the entire basin. The thousands of remaining scavengers in the sinkhole let out a collective, clicking whine and quickly retreated into the dark crevices of the canyon walls, their source of power completely shut off. The floating obelisk settled into a slow, peaceful orbit in the center of the stabilized sinkhole. Gon and Killua landed softly on the salt crust, both of them panting heavily as their glowing auras slowly receded. Naruto collapsed onto his butt, wiping a thick layer of sweat and gray dust from his forehead with a tired laugh. Man, Naruto gasped, looking up at the now stable sky. That was way too close. Sasuke, you owe me a bowl of ramen for that one. You did all the work, Dobi. I just closed the door, Sasuke said, though a faint, rare smirk played on his lips as he sheathed his sword. Jing walked up to the edge of the pit, looking down at the perfectly balanced ceiling matrix with a look of pure, academic satisfaction. He patted Gon and Killua on their shoulders. You kids did an incredible job, Jing said, his eyes shining. Not only did we survive the Dead Sea of Ruin, but we just fixed a broken piece of the world's ancient plumbing. The path to the next sector is completely clear. The silence that followed the sealing of the void well was different from the heavy, suffocating quiet of the dead basin. It was a peaceful, natural silence, like a long-awaited exhale. Jing looked down at the perfectly balanced Otsutsuki monument, then turned his gaze back toward the south, where the warm, golden light of the cradle of the gods met the horizon. He stood there for a quiet moment, his hand resting on his chin, a rare expression of deep, nostalgic satisfaction on his face. Well, Jing said, turning back to the group with his signature lopsided grin. We stabilized the sector, mapped the boundaries of the cradle, and closed a runaway cosmic drain. I'd say that's a pretty successful expedition for 1 week. Wait, Killua said, his electric blue eyes blinking in surprise as he adjusted the strap of his pack. Jing, are we wrapping things up? What about the next sector? The Dark Continent isn't going anywhere, Killua, Jing said, chuckling as he clapped the young assassin on the shoulder. But a good hunter knows when to secure the perimeter and head back to analyze the data. We've collected enough environmental readings, spatial coordinates, and ancient energy samples to keep the researchers back home busy for a decade. If we push further without processing what we've learned here, we're just being reckless. Gon looked up at Naruto and Sasuke, a sudden, soft realization hitting his warm brown eyes. You guys have to go back to your world, don't you? Naruto smiled warmly, reaching out to ruffle Gon's spiky hair, ignoring the boy's half-hearted attempt to dodge. Yeah, Gon, the Leaf Village is great, but I can't leave Kakashi-sensei and Shikamaru holding down the fort forever. Being Hokage means I've got a lot of paperwork waiting for me. And Sasuke here has a family he needs to get back to. Sasuke didn't dispute the comment. He simply looked toward the southern sky, his expression softened by the quiet peace of the stabilized valley. Our threshold of this world was tied to the spatial instability of the void well. Now that the ceiling matrix is restored, the dimensional rift we used to cross over will begin to close within the hour. Then we'd better get moving, Killua said, though a small, genuine smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I guess I don't mind sleeping in a real bed again. Eating instant ramen on a salt flat has its limits. The journey back through the cradle of the gods was lighthearted and swift. Without the threat of the vacuum traps or the oppressive Nen pressure, they made record time, retracing their steps across the deep blue stone bridge where the ancient sentinel now sat in peaceful, undisturbed slumber. When they finally reached the edge of the silence sector, near the original dimensional tear that had brought the two worlds together, the space was already beginning to shimmer and fold like heated glass. Naruto turned to Gon and Killua, extending his right hand with his fist close. Hey, you two are incredibly strong. Keep training, keep exploring, and don't let this guy, he gestured to Killua, tease you too much, Gon. No promises. Killua laughed. Gon grinned brightly, bringing his own fist up and slamming it against Naruto's in a firm, solid bond. We will. Next time we meet, I'm going to show you that I can slice that leaf in half with my nen. Sasuke walked up to Jing, offering a brief, respectful nod. Your knowledge of this world's energy flow was invaluable, Jing. Keep it safe. Always do, Sasuke, Jing smiled, shaking the Uchiha's hand. Safe travels back to your dimension. If the doors ever swing open again, you know where to find us. With one final wave, Naruto and Sasuke stepped backward into the shimmering, lavender rift. The spatial distortion flared with a soft, warm light before collapsing inward, disappearing into a tiny, silent point that vanished completely into the crisp mountain air. Gon and Kahlua stood side by side, looking at the empty space where their otherworldly friends had just been. The wind of the dark continent swept over the ridge, carrying the faint, distant scent of adventure. So, Kahlua said, tossing his hands behind his head. What's the plan now, Jing? Jing adjusted his cap, looking out over the vast, uncharted wilderness of the outer world with a bright, wild spark in his eyes. Now, Jing grinned, we head back to the ship, write our reports, and plan our next trip back. The world is a very big place, boys. And we've barely scratched the surface. The trek back to the coast was long, but without the constant threat of environmental hazards, it felt more like a victory lap. The landscape of the dark continent slowly shifted from the surreal, glowing valleys of the cradle back to the gargantuan, rugged coastlines where the gargantuan trees met the dark, endless waters of the boundary ocean. By the third day, the faint, metallic silhouette of their specially designed deep-sea vessel appeared on the horizon, anchored safely in a deep cove. Gon stood on a high cliff overlooking the sea, his hair whipping in the salty wind. He held his hand out, watching a tiny, perfectly controlled spark of his golden nen dance across his knuckles. It wasn't the wild, explosive aura he had relied on during his fight with the Chimera ants. It was tighter, denser, and infinitely more refined. Still practicing? Kahlua asked, walking up beside him with his hands in his pockets. He looked out at the ocean, his expression relaxed. Yeah, Gon smiled, letting the aura fade. What Naruto said about turning the campfire into a laser beam, it makes so much sense. I used to just throw everything I had into one punch. But watching them, and seeing how you control your lightning, I realize how much further I can go. Well, don't get too ahead of yourself, Kahlua teased, though there was a soft, proud look in his eyes. You've still got a lot of training to do if you want to keep up with me. I will. Gon laughed, turning to look back at Jing, who was sitting on a nearby crate, aggressively arguing with a holographic projection of Cheetle on his communicator. I don't care about the association's budget, Cheetle. We saved an entire sector from a gravity collapse. Jing yelled into the device. Just make sure the research team is ready when we dock. I've got enough data here to rewrite the entire encyclopedia on natural energy. Jing abruptly hung up, sighing deeply as he rubbed the back of his neck. He looked up at the two boys and shook his head, a fond grin returning to his face. Politicians. They never understand the thrill of the frontier, Jing said, standing up and stretching. All right, boys. Grab your gear, the ship is waiting, and we've got a long voyage back to the known world. As they descended the cliff path toward the shore, the sun began to set over the dark continent, casting long, dramatic shadows across the untamed wilderness behind them. They had entered this forbidden land seeking answers, but they were leaving with something far greater. A deeper understanding of their own potential, a map of the impossible, and the memory of a brief, legendary alliance that bridged two entirely different worlds. With the ship's engines humming to life in the harbor, Gon and Kahlua took one last look at the towering trees of the shore, ready for whatever the human world, and the vast, uncharted future, had in store for them next.